On the quiet outskirts of Maplewood, a small town nestled within the wooded hills of Ohio, the world moved gently. The rhythm of life was predictable, dependable, as though time itself had slowed to accommodate the silence of a place where nothing ever changed. But each Saturday morning, just as the church bells echoed faintly from across the valley, something quiet but sacred unfolded along the gravel path leading to Maplewood Cemetery. Emma Collins, 14 years old, never missed her walk. She left precisely at 10 o'clock in the morning, regardless of weather, with her thin braid trailing down the back of her faded denim jacket and a bouquet of hand-picked wildflowers cradled carefully in her palms. She walked past the post office, the corner bakery, and the old barber shop with its rusting red and white pole, never speaking to anyone, her eyes fixed on the winding path ahead. The residents knew her. Not personally, Emma rarely spoke, but they recognized her, the girl with the silent feet and the solemn purpose. It had been that way since the accident. No one ever said the word aloud. Everyone simply knew. The town mourned quietly with her, in the way small towns do, through glances, lowered voices, and respectful distance. Her parents, Mark and Lillian Collins, had died 2 years earlier in a head-on collision with a drunk driver on Route 26, just outside town. Emma, barely 12 at the time, had been in the back seat. She survived. That was the word the papers used. Miraculously survived. But survival came with its own curse, the long silence that followed. She moved in with her maternal grandparents, Margaret and Ray, who did their best, filling the old farmhouse with warmth and routine. But some things could not be patched with soup and soft blankets. So Emma created a ritual. Every Saturday, she visited the same grave. The headstone was modest, etched with both names and a single phrase, "Forever loved, never forgotten." She always arrived in the same outfit, blue jeans, white shirt, denim jacket, and knelt beside the stone with her flowers. She would place them carefully in the small copper vase, brush away leaves or dirt, then sit cross-legged in the grass, facing her parents as though they might speak back. What she whispered to them, no one knew. Not the caretaker who kept his respectful distance. Not the joggers who passed occasionally along the edge of the cemetery stone wall. Not even the ravens that perched in the sycamores nearby, watching with unblinking eyes. Some said it was prayer. Others guessed it was conversation. She talks to them. The old librarian, Miss Halloran, once said, "I saw her lips moving." But no one approached her. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was reverence. To interrupt her would have been like stepping into a sacred space. Emma belonged to that moment, and that moment belonged only to her. For Emma, the ritual was more than remembrance. It was a bridge between the world she had lost and the one she had been left in. The flowers were never purchased. That would have felt wrong. Instead, she gathered them herself early in the morning from the field behind the house. Daisies in summer, queen anne's lace in early fall, whatever nature offered. And every time she whispered her prayer, it was the same. "God, I know you took them because you had a plan. But if you can, could you please just send a sign that they're okay?" No lightning cracked the sky. No wind stirred the trees with sudden urgency. The grave remained still, silent. And yet, Emma never stopped asking. The town watched her grow older, taller, her features slowly sharpening into the shape of a young woman. Her silence never changed. Her routine never faltered. Saturday after Saturday, she returned, kneeling, praying, hoping. It was a beautiful sadness, a portrait in motion, until the day someone followed her. He was an older man, tall but stooped, with thinning white hair and hands that trembled slightly when he carried his morning newspaper. He had noticed her before. Anyone who lived near the cemetery had. But that Saturday, something unsettled him. A need to understand, perhaps, or simply to know what kept drawing that young girl back, week after week, with such quiet devotion. His name was Michael Reeves. Retired, widowed, and mostly forgotten by the world beyond the fences of his small, ivy-covered home. That morning, he didn't stop at the porch. He didn't return inside with his coffee and crossword puzzle. Instead, he tucked the newspaper under his arm and followed the girl at a distance, careful not to be seen, careful not to interrupt. He didn't know what he expected to find. Perhaps he thought she would simply lay the flowers and walk away, her duty done. But as he watched from behind a low hedge near the cemetery gate, he saw her do something else, something that broke the stillness of the world around them. She sat down, closed her eyes, and whispered. He strained to hear, stepping closer than he should have. And then, just as the wind hushed for the briefest moment, he heard her words, soft and clear, fragile and brave. God, I know you took them because you had a plan. But if you could you please just send a sign that they're okay? The prayer was not long. It was not desperate. It was not even angry. But it reached deep into something that Michael had long buried beneath layers of time and silence. A question formed in his mind, one that would not leave him. What if she never got an answer? He watched her a moment longer, until she rose, brushed grass from her jeans, and walked away. And then he stood there, utterly still, heart aching in a way he had not felt in years. That evening, he sat at his kitchen table, staring at an empty piece of paper. For the first time in a very long time, he considered writing something not for himself, but for someone else. Not to change her life, but simply to let her know someone was listening. Michael Reeves had not slept well that night. He wasn't a man prone to restlessness. Years of solitude had trained him to accept the quiet with stoic resignation, but something about the girl's whispered prayer lingered like a splinter under the skin. He had not meant to listen, not really. Curiosity was one thing, eavesdropping on grief was another. But once her voice reached him, barely above the rustling leaves, it pierced him in a way he could not shake. Sunday morning arrived with overcast skies and the kind of chill that hinted at early October. Michael sat at his kitchen table, fingers wrapped around a lukewarm mug of coffee, his mind circling the same image over and over. The girl kneeling by the grave, her words floating like smoke into the air. Could you please just send a sign that they're okay? That line, so gentle, so full of raw hope, felt like a weight in his chest. It echoed with an ache he thought he had long buried. Years ago, he had whispered similar words. He remembered the hospital room, the beeping machines, the sterile light washing everything in pale indifference. His daughter, Elise, had been only 17 when she died. A car crash, not unlike the one that had taken Emma's parents. The driver in her case had been Elise herself. A momentary lapse in judgment, rain, speed, distraction. It didn't matter. She was gone. And Michael had never forgiven the world or himself for not saying goodbye properly. Her mother, his wife Eleanor, followed 4 years later, cancer eating through her body like fire through dry grass. Since then, silence had been Michael's only companion. But Emma's prayer, so simple and undeserving of the void it fell into, awakened something dormant. He couldn't undo her pain, nor his own, but he could no longer pretend he hadn't heard her. He had, and that truth demanded an answer. On Monday afternoon, he returned to the cemetery, alone. There were few visitors at that hour. A light drizzle made the place feel emptier than usual. He approached the Collins headstone with cautious steps, like approaching a sleeping creature that might startle. He noticed the copper vase still held the wilting wildflowers she had brought. He hadn't realized how small the grave was. It looked like it belonged in a storybook, a modest stone with delicate engraving, lovingly kept. He hesitated only for a moment before slipping a folded note behind the vase. The words had taken hours to write. They were brief. "They're okay, and you are stronger than you think." He didn't sign it, didn't leave a mark of any kind. It wasn't meant to be from him. Not really. It was meant to be a sign. And for the next few days, Michael tried not to think about it. He raked the leaves in his yard, filled the bird feeders, and half-heartedly organized the garage. But every few hours, his mind returned to that folded piece of paper sitting quietly among the graves. Would she find it? Would she believe it? Would it matter? Saturday returned too quickly. At precisely 10 o'clock in the morning, Emma walked the path again. Michael didn't follow this time. He watched from his porch, behind the veil of a curtain. She looked the same as always. Same denim jacket, same careful pace, same quiet composure. But when she reached the grave, he saw her pause. She tilted her head slightly, as if sensing something different. and then crouched slowly to examine the flowers. Her fingers reached for the paper. From his distant perch, Michael held his breath. She unfolded it with care, her eyes scanning the message. He couldn't read her expression, but her stillness spoke volumes. She didn't cry, didn't look around. She simply stared at the words, the way someone might gaze at a lighthouse from a stormy sea. She returned the note to her pocket. Michael didn't see her leave that day. He had turned away, not wanting to intrude on what came next. But what came next surprised even him. The following Saturday, when Emma arrived at the cemetery, she carried something besides flowers. A folded sheet of lined notebook paper. She knelt as usual, laid the bouquet down, then slipped the note into the vase, where only someone who knew to look would find it. She lingered longer than usual, and then she left. Michael waited nearly an hour before daring to approach. His hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from something else. When he opened the note, the handwriting was delicate, slightly uneven, but clearly careful. Thank you. I don't know who you are. I don't even know if this is real. But if you're listening, did you ever lose someone too? It was the first time in years that Michael's heart broke open. He sat down on the stone bench nearby and stared at the letter for a long time, unsure whether to smile or weep. The question was not accusatory. It was curious, honest, vulnerable. He folded the note slowly, placed it in his jacket pocket, and walked home with his thoughts louder than the rustling trees around him. That evening, he sat again at his kitchen table, staring at the lamp overhead as though it might offer wisdom. Her question rattled inside him. Did you ever lose someone too? How could he answer that without opening a door he had kept locked for over a decade? He didn't write back that night. Instead, he pulled a box from his closet, one that had not been opened since Eleanor's funeral. Inside were photographs, faded Polaroids, yellowing prints, of a life that now seemed impossibly distant. Elise smiling with a birthday cake. Eleanor reading in the garden. Himself, younger, happier, unaware of what life would take from him. He looked through them until the sun disappeared behind the hills. On Sunday morning, he finally wrote his reply. Yes, I lost my daughter. Her name was Elise. She was 17. I never got a sign, but I waited for one for a long time. Maybe writing to you is what I needed back then. He left a note at the grave the next day. For the first time since Elise's death, Michael felt something unfamiliar rising within him, a quiet urgency to stay connected, to not retreat again. This was not about healing completely. He didn't believe in such things anymore. But something had shifted. The letters continued, once a week. They never signed their names. Emma never asked who he was, and Michael never told her. Their words lived only at the grave, exchanged in silence. A dialogue built on grief and the stubborn hope that someone, anyone, might understand. It was in her fourth note that Emma asked a question that changed everything. Why do I still feel alone, even when I pretend I'm okay? Michael read that note 4 times, standing beneath the sycamore trees, as the wind pressed cold fingers against his coat. That was the question he had never dared to answer himself. And that Saturday, he decided not to leave a note. He decided to wait for her, to meet her, and to tell the truth. The air was heavy with anticipation on the morning Michael Reeves chose to break the unspoken rule that had defined their secret exchange. For weeks, he had communicated through folded pages and cautious anonymity, sheltering both himself and Emma beneath the safety of silence. But the last note she had left, the question that reached deep into his unresolved grief, had shifted something fundamental. It was not just the honesty of her words that struck him, but the vulnerability hidden behind them. Why do I still feel alone, even when I pretend I'm okay? That was not the kind of question that deserved a letter. That was the kind of question that needed a face, a voice, a presence. So that Saturday, instead of staying home and waiting for the girl to come and go unseen, Michael arrived early. The sun had barely broken through the gray canopy overhead when he sat down on the bench near the Collins headstone, a thermos of coffee by his side, and a folded note in his coat pocket, just in case. He wasn't sure how she would react. Part of him expected her to be startled, maybe even angry, but a deeper part, the part that had grown quiet over the years, hoped she would understand. When Emma appeared, right on time, her pace slowed the moment she saw him. She stopped a few feet away, the familiar bouquet of wildflowers trembling slightly in her hand. Michael rose slowly, making sure not to startle her. He didn't smile, didn't move closer, just stood there, hands in his pockets, waiting for her to decide what came next. Her eyes, cautious and steady, locked onto his. She didn't speak. Neither did he, not at first. Finally, she stepped forward and placed the flowers in the vase, as she always did. Then she sat down cross-legged in front of the stone, not acknowledging him, but not ignoring him either. Michael took that as permission and sat back on the bench, folding his hands in his lap. For several minutes, they said nothing. The cemetery was quiet, save for the distant rustle of wind through the trees. It might have been awkward, but it wasn't. There was something oddly sacred about the silence, as though their presence together had changed the rules of the place. Eventually, Emma turned her head slightly, not facing him, but enough to let him know she was ready. "I thought you were just a note," she said quietly. Michael nodded, then responded with the same softness. "I was, for a while." She looked down at her hands. "Why now?" He took a breath, eyes fixed on the leaves scattered across the path. "Because you asked something I couldn't answer with paper." Emma didn't reply. She hugged her knees to her chest, staring at the names carved into the headstone. The wind lifted her braids slightly, then let it fall. "They died fast," she said after a moment. "People say that like it's better. Quick. No suffering. But it still hurts the same, you know?" Michael leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. "Yes," he said, "it does." They sat like that for a while. Two people separated by years, but joined by something neither could see, something stitched into the silence between them. Finally, Emma broke it again. "You really lost your daughter?" Michael nodded. Her name was Elise. 17. Smart. Funny. More stubborn than I ever was. Emma turned to look at him fully for the first time. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes held something new. Not suspicion, not fear. Something closer to recognition. "I'm sorry," she said. "Me too." She paused. "Did writing the letters help?" "I didn't know I needed to until I started," he replied. "You made me remember her in a way I hadn't for a long time. Not just the end, but everything." Emma's lips tightened slightly, the way they did when she was holding back emotion. "I liked your first note," she said. "It felt like God answered me. Not in a big way, but just enough." Michael looked down. "I hoped it would feel that way." There was another silence, but it was gentler now. Shared, not empty. Emma picked at a blade of grass by her foot. "I've never told anyone about my prayers. Not even my grandparents. They don't ask." "You don't talk much," Michael observed, not unkindly. She shook her head. "There's not much to say. People think I'm doing okay because I'm not crying all the time, but I still feel like I'm in pieces. Just quiet ones." Michael considered that for a long moment. "Grief isn't loud for everyone," he said. "Sometimes it just sits with you, quiet and heavy." Emma looked at him again. "Does it go away?" "No," he said honestly. "But it changes. It doesn't stay sharp forever. After a while, it becomes part of how you see the world. Not something that controls you, but something that shapes you." She nodded slowly, absorbing the thought. Then, after a pause, she asked, "Do you ever talk to her? Your daughter?" Michael gave a half smile. "Not out loud. Not like you do. But sometimes I think she's around. When I hear a certain song. When I smell her shampoo in an old coat. Little things." "I keep hearing my dad's laugh in my head," Emma said, almost in a whisper, "and my mom's voice when I brush my hair. I thought maybe I was just making it up." "No," Michael replied. "That's memory. It lives in you. You're not imagining it. It's part of you now." Emma looked back at the grave and gave a quiet nod. Then she stood up, dusting off her jeans. For a moment, Michael thought she might walk away without another word. But instead, she looked down at him and asked something unexpected. "Will you come with me next Saturday?" Michael blinked. "To the cemetery?" "No," she said, Before that, I picked the flowers myself. There's a field behind the farmhouse. It's quiet. You might like it." He hesitated, but the invitation was so earnest, so delicately offered, that he couldn't bring himself to refuse. "I'd like that," he said. "Okay," she replied, already walking back toward the path. 10 o'clock, just like always. As she disappeared beyond the iron gate, Michael remained on the bench for a long while, staring at the flowers she had left in the space where she had sat. The world felt quieter, but not empty. He had come to offer comfort, but in the process, he had received it, too. The next Saturday would bring something new. Not just a walk, not just another letter, but the first steps of something neither of them had expected. A shared ritual, a new rhythm, and perhaps the beginning of healing for both. The following Saturday dawned crisp and blue, the kind of morning that felt like a held breath before autumn finally exhaled. Dew clung to the grass in silver threads, and the sky above Maplewood was washed in the pale gold of early October light. At 10 o'clock sharp, as promised, Michael Reeves stood at the edge of a narrow field behind the farmhouse where Emma lived with her grandparents. He wore his best flannel shirt and the cleaner of his 2 jackets, a bit self-conscious as he waited by the rusting fence post, unsure if he should have brought something, flowers maybe, or a thermos of tea. But before he could overthink further, Emma emerged from the back porch, a canvas bag slung over one shoulder, boots already streaked with dirt, and her braid tight and tidied down her back. "You came," she said plainly, without surprise, as if his presence had never been in question. "I said I would," he replied. The walk in the field was quiet, not awkward but calm, filled with the easy silence that had begun to settle between them. Wildflowers still dotted the edges of the clearing. Purple asters, late goldenrod, and clumps of milkweed bursting with white fluff. Emma crouched now and then to collect them with care, placing each stem in her bag with the same reverence she showed at the cemetery. Michael followed, slower, his knees not quite as cooperative, but there was something peaceful about the act. Not gardening, not picking, something gentler, a ritual without words. "You know," Emma said after a while, inspecting a sprig of yellow yarrow, "I used to come out here with my mom, not every week, just sometimes. She said wildflowers didn't need much to grow, just sunlight and a little space." Michael bent down beside her, watching as she added the yarrow to her bundle. "Your mom was right," he said. "They know how to survive." Emma stood and dusted off her hands. "So do we," she replied, then turned to keep walking. He followed her again, this time more slowly, letting the weight of her words settle. They didn't go to the cemetery that day. Not immediately. Instead, Emma led him to a hill at the far end of the property where the trees opened slightly and a flat rock served as an impromptu bench. She sat, legs crossed, the bag of flowers resting beside her, and patted the spot next to her. Michael joined her with some effort, and they both looked out over the field in silence. It was vast but intimate, the kind of view that made you think about everything and nothing at the same time. "I wanted to ask you something," she said after a while, not looking at him. "Anything. Why did you write that first note?" Her voice was steady, but there was something under it. Uncertainty, maybe even fear. "You didn't know me. You could have ignored me like everyone else." Michael took a long breath. He didn't want to lie, but he wasn't sure how much of the truth he was ready to give. Still, her question deserved more than a vague answer. "I didn't plan to," he admitted. "I followed you out of curiosity. I saw you there, and I heard what you said. I know I shouldn't have listened, but your prayer, it reminded me of something I hadn't let myself feel in years. I thought, maybe you deserved a sign, even if it wasn't from God." Emma looked at him, her expression unreadable. "So you became the sign." "I tried," he said softly, "not to trick you, just to remind you that someone heard you." She was quiet for a long time, then finally nodded. "I didn't think it was God. Not really. But it felt like someone had answered. And that was enough." Michael watched her closely. "You weren't scared." "I was curious. A little scared, maybe, but mostly I felt less alone." They sat together in the soft breeze, and for the first time, Michael realized how rare that feeling had become in his life. He had grown so used to being alone that he had stopped even noticing the absence of connection. But with Emma, that isolation had cracked open. She didn't feel the emptiness. Exactly. She acknowledged it, shared it, and made it feel less like a prison. After a while, Emma reached into her bag and pulled out a small object, a laminated photo worn at the edges. She handed it to him without speaking. It was a picture of her parents, Mark and Lillian Collins. They were standing in front of a lake, smiling wide, her father's arm slung casually over her mother's shoulder. There was sunlight behind them, and something in their posture spoke of laughter just before or after the photo had been taken. "I keep it in my room," Emma said. "But sometimes it doesn't feel real anymore, like they're frozen in a picture and I'm still moving." Michael looked at the image for a long time before handing it back. "They look kind," he said. "They were," she replied, placing it carefully back into her bag. "And silly. My dad used to make these awful puns. My mom would pretend to hate them, but she'd always laugh." Michael smiled faintly. "Sounds familiar." Emma tilted her head. "You and your daughter?" "She was a musician," he said. "Guitar mostly. She loved everything from classical to metal. Said music made her feel like she could speak without words." "That's how I feel when I'm in the field," Emma said. "Or at the cemetery. It's like I don't need to explain anything. I just feel things." Michael nodded. "That's how healing begins." They walked back slowly, their bags heavy with wildflowers than when they'd started. This time, Michael carried part of the load. When they reached the cemetery, they arranged the flowers together. Carefully, thoughtfully, Emma picked the best stems for the vase at the grave, while Michael helped clear away fallen leaves. They didn't speak much during the process, but their silence was no longer filled with uncertainty. It was a silence of understanding. Before leaving, Emma stood beside the headstone and whispered something. Michael stepped back to give her space. When she finished, she turned to him and asked, "Would you come again next Saturday?" "Of course," he said without hesitation. "And maybe," she added, "you could bring something of Elise? A picture, or something she liked, just to share her with me too?" Michael felt his chest tighten. No one had asked him that in years. No one had wanted to know Elise the way she had been before the tragedy. He nodded slowly. "I'll bring something." As they parted ways, Michael realized what Emma had given him wasn't just company. It was permission to remember, to grieve, and finally to speak. And in the quiet space between her question and his promise, something powerful had taken root. It was not the end of grief, but it was, perhaps, the beginning of something else entirely. The Saturdays that followed began to take on a new shape, no longer defined by silence and solitude, but by shared purpose and quiet companionship. Emma and Michael had formed something that neither of them could fully explain, though both understood it without the need for many words. Each week, they met behind a farmhouse at 10 o'clock in the morning, gathered flowers together from the wild field that swayed softly under the shifting Ohio sky, and made their way to the cemetery side by side. What had once been an unspoken ritual rooted in grief was now evolving into something that bore the weight of memory without being crushed by it. True to his word, Michael brought something of Elise to the next visit, a photograph, worn and slightly creased, of her seated on a wooden stage with guitar resting across her lap. Her head was tilted in laughter, her fingers mid-chord, eyes gleaming with mischief and music. Emma studied the image for a long moment, then surprised him by asking softly, "What song was she playing?" Michael hesitated, then answered with a wistful smile. "She used to play her own songs. Said nobody else wrote what she wanted to say." "Smart," Emma murmured, "and brave." Michael nodded. She was both, sometimes too much of both. That day, they placed a picture at the foot of Elise's name on a small wooden plaque Michael had recently set beside his wife's grave. Emma knelt down and added a single white daisy to the arrangement. "I'll remember her," she said, "even if I never knew her. You told me about her, and that counts." Over time, the cemetery visits began to transform. They weren't just about honoring the dead anymore. They became moments of quiet exchange. Michael would bring stories of Elise, and Emma would offer fragments of her memories, anecdotes that had no place in classrooms or family dinners. One morning, She told him about the time her dad tried to teach her how to whistle using grass blades and ended up with a cut lip. Another Saturday. She confessed how, after the accident, she kept sleeping on the floor beside her mother's empty bed, as if the proximity might bring her back. Michael listened, always, without interruption, without offering solutions, just the still presence of someone who knew what it meant to carry sorrow like a second skin. And when it was his turn to speak, Emma offered him the same sacred space. She never asked him to move on, never encouraged him to look on the bright side. She simply listened, and in doing so, gave his grief the dignity of being acknowledged without being fixed. It wasn't long before Emma had an idea. They were sitting on the bench near her parents' grave, the last of the autumn leaves rustling down around them, when she turned in with eyes lit by a purpose that startled him. "You played guitar, didn't you?" she asked. Michael blinked, caught off guard. "A long time ago. Mostly just chords behind Elise. She was a real musician. But you can still play?" He hesitated. "Maybe. My fingers aren't what they used to be." Emma tilted her head, considering. "Do you still have a guitar?" He nodded. "It's in the attic. Hasn't been touched in years." "Would you play for me sometime?" she asked, not as a favor, but as an invitation. "And maybe we could show other kids. I mean, not about grief. Not exactly. But about how music helps. Or stories. Or remembering." Michael studied her for a long moment, surprised not just by the suggestion, but by the spark behind it. There was something alive in her that hadn't been there before. Not a return to innocence. Grief didn't allow that. But a kindling of hope, a small flame not so easily snuffed out. "You mean teach?" She shrugged, as if the word didn't quite capture what she meant. "Sure, maybe. With other kids. At school. I think they'd listen to you. And if you help me, I could help you." It was the first time in years someone had asked him to participate in life again, not merely to survive it. The thought of standing in front of children, of telling his story, or playing even one chord, filled him with anxiety and strange anticipation. But more than anything, it felt like a beginning. "I'll think about it," he said, his voice quieter than usual. Emma smiled. "That's all I ask." By early November, the school counselor had heard about the idea through Emma's teacher, who had noticed a shift in the girl's demeanor. Still quiet, still reserved, but less heavy, more grounded. An invitation was extended, and Michael reluctantly agreed to visit the school one afternoon. The children were younger than Elise had been, 6th and 7th graders, wide-eyed and restless. But they listened when he spoke. He brought the guitar, hands trembling slightly as he played the first few chords of a song Elise had written, and told them about the daughter he'd lost, and the girl who helped him remember. Emma sat in the front row, her face unreadable but proud. From that afternoon on, something shifted again. What had started as private grief shared between two unlikely companions began to ripple outward, touching others. Michael found himself returning weekly, offering guitar lessons in small groups after school. Emma helped him organize the sessions, even writing short prompts that encouraged the kids to write songs or stories about people they missed or places they remembered. Together, they created a space that allowed others to speak without shame. And in doing so, they rewrote their own relationship with memory, not as a wound, but as a bridge. At home, Emma's grandparents noticed a change. Margaret, quiet but perceptive, found her granddaughter humming softly while setting the table, something she hadn't done since the accident. Ray began joining their walks to the mailbox again, listening with quiet amusement as Emma recounted how Mr. Reeves made everyone laugh when he broke a string mid-song and cursed under his breath. And in Michael's home, once silent and still, music began to rise again. He dusted off old songbooks, restrummed the guitar, and opened the windows when he played. The walls that had held only silence now echoed with chords and the faint hum of healing. But the most profound change was invisible to anyone else. Each Saturday, when Emma and Michael returned to the cemetery, they still brought flowers. They still knelt, still whispered, still remembered. But the weight of those visits had shifted. They were no longer simply rituals of mourning. They were acts of connection between past and present, between two souls who found one another not despite their pain, but through it. And so the townspeople of Maplewood, who had once watched the quiet girl with the same bouquet and same routine, began to notice something different. Now, she came with a companion. Now, she stayed a little longer. Now, she left with a lighter step. And alongside her walked an older man, no longer hunched by grief, but standing a little taller, as though carrying a purpose again. They didn't speak much as they walked home. They didn't need to. The miracle Emma had prayed for had come, not in thunder or revelation, not from the heavens, but from the simple act of being heard. And sometimes that is enough.